Hi everyone. The critical thinker that I researched was Maria Montessori. Just to get started, I wanted to give you some background information on her life and how she got into education. She was born in 1870, and keep in mind that was around 100 years after the Enlightenment, which is important to some of her later ideas. She was the first woman in Italy to graduate from the University of Rome with a medical degree, and she actually went on to become a licensed medical doctor at the age of 26. She worked at the University of Rome's psychiatric clinic, and one of her duties was kind of crazy. It was to go to an insane asylum and choose people fit to come into their psychiatric clinic. And when she went to visit that asylum, what she found was astounding. Children with special needs living in the chambers with the asylum residents. She was given permission to evacuate these children from the insane asylum and put them in a hospital, and this is actually where she began working with the children and testing her theories for educating them. So while she's working with them, she's developing and designing tools that were pleasing to the eye, self-corrective, and sequential, with basic concepts isolated for ease of understanding. And these were the concepts such as rough and smooth or long and short, taught through the children's senses. And because of this work working with students with the special needs, she began to wonder about the education system that typically functioning children were experiencing, and she was wondering how the kids that she was working with special needs could pass these tests, but the typically functioning children couldn't. So she decided to quit her job in medicine and decide to educate herself on typically functioning children. She opened her school in 1907, translated to the Children's House or the Children's Home. It became hugely successful, and her method became world famous. In 1908, she began working with 60 young children and families full-time and quit her job working at the hospital and in medicine. Then, in 1909, she published her first book, The Montessori Method, and ran her first international teaching program with students from all over the world. The next thing I wanted to discuss was how she kind of fits into this progressive mindset and how she was a progressive thinker. So, what is progressivism? According to our textbook, it is a theory that promotes social and educational change and reform. It originated in the Enlightenment era, known as the Age of Reason, and emphasized human intelligence and using science to improve society. These ideas had important contributions for the way Montessori thought. Within this era, the philosophes looked to nature to see how individuals should live life. The idea that through careful and consistent observation, it was possible to see how the world worked. Montessori's values aligned with this because her core values came down to observing children to see how they would learn the most efficiently. This leads me into the 4 core principles that are from the Enlightenment theorists that I believe that Montessori would agree with. So the first principle is children are naturally good and their instincts and needs should guide education. Human growth is a natural process. People can use their intelligence, especially the scientific method, to solve problems and reform society. And humankind's future can be progressively better than its past. Maria's methods were scientifically driven. She believed that people were intrinsically good and can use their intelligence to solve problems. Her ideas definitely reflected the ideas from this time. Then I wanted to just mention how she thought in a progressive way and the 3 types of progressive thinkers. So there's a child-centered progressivist, there's progressives influenced by pragmatics, and there's progressives influenced by liberalism. So the child-centered progressivism is when they think that education requires flexibility and openness to change, and this way of thinking allows children to be expressive. Then the progressives influenced by pragmatics are rooted from Dewey, the other critical thinker this week, or the other of the two. And they think that education means openness to experience in which learners solve problems that arise in their environment by using the scientific method. And then the final type of progressivist is the one influenced by liberalism, and they think that education is a way of informing people about what needs to be fixed to keep societal institutions running properly. They want to find ways to reform social institutions so that they stay relevant within society. And in my opinion, I think that Maria was a combination of both child-centered and influenced by pragmatics. She believes that instruction should be very student-centered, but also very based in science and observation. The next thing I wanted to talk about were the contributions that Montessori had to educational theory. So she recognized 3 distinct sensitive periods in childhood, what we would know as stages today. So the stages were from birth to 6, 6 to 12, and 12 to 18. As children go through these developmental stages, they move from pre-conventional to conventional thought. The next contribution was that she believed that the environment of the classroom should be responsive, and when children are able to experience the consequences of their actions in a safe way. So the environment should be organized and ready for children to work on self-directed learning activities, and each element of the environment is responsive to the stages above. The next contribution of Montessori is that instruction is not to be a drill, but instruction to the child should be guided by the teacher, or as Montessori called them, the directress, so that they can go through their own self-directed learning sequence. The students should be free to choose what activity they'd like to partake in, and in a free environment, learners are free to demonstrate their knowledge, and teachers remain neutral to ensure that students don't feel judged, and the idea of imitation is encouraged. This gives children immediate critical feedback rather than telling the child that what they did was wrong. The child experiences it. They know that they did it wrong, which is a key idea behind Montessori's philosophy. The next one I would like to talk about is practical life skills, and they were stressed by Montessori that academic learning should be taught through the use of these skills. Even though she was best known for her work in early childhood, this idea can be applied throughout all educational levels. An example of this is in a Montessori classroom, you would see the child prepping food or cutting apples or washing the dishes or folding the towels. They would be doing the practical life skill. The final contribution is in relation to curriculum. When curriculum is relevant to student interest and their appropriate developmental stage, the teacher can guide the child towards appropriate and civil behavior. If students are interested in what they're doing, there's no need to punish or reward students if everything goes smoothly. So through this, they're taught self-discipline. And this actually, before that, I wanted to just mention a quick quote by her that I just thought applied here. So she said, "Our work is not to teach, but to help the absorbent mind in its work of development." So I just wanted to pop in my discussion question here. What do you think is the most and least relevant contribution Montessori has had on education? Because we only see only a couple of Montessori schools, and I just want to know what you guys think about these contributions and where we see them in today's education. All right, the lasting effects on the U.S. So, as I was just saying, Montessori schools aren't very popular in comparison to the 5,000 Montessori schools. There are over 87,000 public elementary schools. So this leads me to say that there's kind of a small impact on the U.S. in the sense of the number of schools, and in the sense that the foundation of the curriculums are super different. Montessori curriculums are based on student-guided work where the teacher is a support system for the child and not really directing them in any way. Whereas public schools are the focal point of or teachers are the focal point of the room. There is a direct instruction, there's a solid routine, and so this just shows how different the role of the teacher and student are very different between schools now in the US versus Montessori schools. But I would like to point out that respect to the child, I feel, is super important in both schools. So I think that's one thing that we see in the US today. But we definitely see less of Montessori in the US schools today, other than other critical thinkers. And she wasn't even in our textbook, besides like 2 paragraphs. So I was like, wow, I didn't realize that she just had such a small impact. I thought Montessori's were pretty common, but I guess not. All right, moving on to her thoughts on culturally responsive practice. Looking back on what we've discussed about her contributions to education, I see a couple of components that relate to culturally relevant, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, relevant teaching methods in her methods. The first similar principle between the two is student-centered instruction. This is the core idea behind Montessori's methods. She wants to observe the children to see how her instruction can be best suited for them, which falls right into just student-led instruction. Then the other commonality between the two is having the teacher be a guide for the students rather than directly instructing them. Then I just wanted to reflect on her history. She was implementing her school during World War II and accepted all children in her schools, all of the immigrants, orphans, just anyone who needed an education. She would give it to anyone. So I think that she would probably still have this view if she were still around today. So there are elements of culturally responsive practice within the Montessori methods. However, there's not an outstanding amount of similarities. But as she was a progressivist, she welcomed change, and she may have changed some of the ways her instruction was taught and what was being taught within her classroom. This leads us to our final discussion question. Have you ever heard about the Montessori schools before taking education courses or becoming involved within the education field? Do you think that her methods have a place in school or in public schools today? So yes, that is the end of my presentation. Here are my resources, and I hope that you learned a little bit more about Maria Montessori and her impacts on education. Thanks, guys.